welcome to another episode of The Unlicensed Counselor. My name is Steve Moak. I am the Unlicensed Counselor in a very, very special episode today. Brought in our first guest and looking forward to kind of introducing you to my friend Seth Leibsohn, local legend, broadcast hero, 960 The Patriot here in Arizona, but really just a bright friend and someone that I've gotten involved with in the nonprofit work that we're doing here. And so happy to have him in studio. So thanks for joining us, Seth.
It's an honor to be your first guest.
That is kind of fun, right? It's nice to have somebody to be able to kind of kick this around with and actually have a conversation around some of the stuff that I want to talk about today. But if you don't mind, before I jump into that, let me just say a quick couple thank yous to our sponsors out here. First, our friends at ShareTech. Again, if you're in the market for an at-home drug or alcohol screen, please go to betterdrugtest.com, the most accurate and comprehensive drug and alcohol screen available on the market. You've heard me talk about it before. If you or your loved one needs this, you need something that you can test, not a cheapie and that you can trust, not a cheapie test that you purchase off of Amazon. So go to betterdrugtest.com, pick that up. Our friends at EasySheets.club, the most comfortable subscription service you're ever going to own. I promise you, you and your loved one are going to love it. Freshly pressed, professionally cleaned sheets sent directly to your home, starting at $50 a month. Sign us up for it. It's a better way of doing sheets, folks. It's 2023 going into 2024. You're really going to be happy that you took my suggestion on that one. And this last one is the nonprofit that I've been speaking about. This is the Coalition for Youth Drug Abuse Prevention. This is the campaign's called Hard Stop. And this is something I'm very passionate about. I've shared it with my audience numerous times. And actually, it was actually Seth's idea to create this nonprofit organization. He's been in the behavioral health world. He's been a champion for youth drug abuse prevention and actually reached out to a small group of us and said, hey, I've got this idea. I want to do something. And would you be a part of it? So go to the stopstartshere.org and find out what we're doing. Most importantly, follow us at Hard Stop Official on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all that stuff. What we're doing is creating really edgy, cool content that's directly geared towards the youth out there. So it kind of brings me right into our conversation, Seth. So again, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time. It's fun. I'm chuckling because we're friends, and I'm used to having these types of conversations either on your show or just over the phone or over dinner or something like that. But I'm excited to get to talk about the nonprofit and what we're doing, but then just have a friend in studio as well. So maybe before we get going, introduce yourself, a little bit of background on you, why you felt passionate about starting an organization like this, and then also some of the other work that you've done in this space also.
Well, thanks, Steve, and it's an honor to be here and to be your first guest. It truly is. It's an honor to know you and your family, which have been on the front lines of this issue for a very long time, and it's a very important issue. I guess I've been involved in and interested in prevention since the 1980s. Everyone has a story about knowing someone that got involved in addiction issues. I suppose my interest in it started in college when my roommate was easily far and above the brightest kid in the class, on his way to becoming probably the next F. Scott Fitzgerald or something like that. He was just one of the most, by acclamation, skilled writers, thinkers, creative minds. And over the years, we watched him using more and more marijuana and just kind of washing out and ending up Nowheresville. I had a sister who at a young age got involved with drugs and now in her, 40s, still wrestling with those issues, in and out with law enforcement. But I had the privilege of a lifetime of being able to work with our nation's first drug czar, William J. Bennett, and learned an awful lot from him when we were running a think tank. And one of the things that most people don't realize, and it's unfortunate that they don't, is that we can do something about this. People like to talk about how you cannot do something about this. Well, then we'll just surrender the white flag and watch the body count rise and rise.
Right.
But 1979 was the high water mark of drug use in this country, when about 14% of the population was regularly using dangerous and illegal drugs. And the country got serious about it, rolled up its sleeves, and decided to have a nationwide, culture-wide campaign to do something about it. And it infused Hollywood, it infused actors and actresses, every governor and senator, presidents, you couldn't go anywhere without hearing an anti-drug or how drugs are dangerous message. Many people will remember the This Is Your Brain on Drugs campaign, the frying egg, right? The woman jumping into the empty swimming pool. And in 13 years, we reduced drug use in this country by over 60%.
I don't think people acknowledge
No
that,
idea.
remember it, or don't
idea.
want to conveniently remember that.
No idea.
It was working.
Absolutely, it was working. If we reduced any other problem in this country, you think about fatherlessness, you think about poverty, you think about welfare, you think about homeless issues, you think about any other problem we could reduce, but we would still be holding ticker tape parades.
It's unbelievable, and I'm surprised. And what we do with an emphasis on social media, we get a lot of comments very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me that people just kind of immediately either poo-poo this, say it doesn't work. They always reference DARE or This Is Your Brain on Drugs types of campaigns. And I'm going, hey, these were effective, right? And what do you think? We're just going to do nothing now? I mean, we had a record number of lives lost due to poisonings. People call it overdose. We like to call it poisonings because I do believe, as you believe, that these aren't people who took too much. These are oftentimes people who just took something they didn't know that it was laced with, which is what a poisoning is. So, when I'm having conversations with folks about DARE or This Is Your Brain on Drug types of campaigns, they're like, it didn't work. I think that's not accurate, right?
Well, let me tell you what doesn't work. Giving up doesn't work.
Great point.
So in 1992, which is when we hit the 60% reduction mark, we were losing about 5,000 Americans a year to drug poisoning deaths, what they call drug overdose deaths, what you and I call drug poisoning deaths. About 5,000 Americans a year. Country population was about 240 million back then. So we're at about 330 million now, 335 million now. We gave up on that, and we're losing 110,000 Americans a year. So what that means is that as the population grew by 33%, drug poisoning deaths grew by over 2,000%. You tell me what worked, and you tell me what doesn't work.
That's shocking. Why is it that those stats get thrown around so often, and it feels like people's eyes either glaze over, or they don't listen, they don't resonate? Is there a reason why we hear these things and we don't take more stronger action? I've yet to kind of do the math why people respond in such a kind of, it just is what it is kind of way.
That's probably a 5-hour radio show. And I can't do much better than what you said in your last podcast on harm reduction. That was a fantastic episode. I want to refer to the audience that they listen to it or watch it, September 7th, if I'm not mistaken. Almost everything that needed to be said on this issue, you said it. You got it exactly right, perfectly right. But I think there's a frustration, and I think there's a coddling, and I think there's a new autonomy movement and a libertarianism. The sad story is when I said 1979 was the worst year, it was until this past year, when we beat it. So 14% in 1979, we got it down into the sixes. We're now at 14.3%. So we have, snaps for us. We have now beaten that low water mark, that high water mark, and have reached a new one, which is really a low point. Steve, I think some of this has to do with the fact that people are frustrated, but some of it has to do with the language too. So you and I have been very serious about language. We have stopped using the word overdose because how do you overdose on an illegal and dangerous drug that is meant to kill you, like fentanyl? It's not an overdose, it's a dose. So we're calling it a poisoning. In those days, and when we were serious in the 80s and 90s, we called it illegal drug use and addiction. And slowly but surely, as the culture turned away from our successes and the libertarian mindset started taking place, and the therapeutic mindset and the recovery mindset, I have to put some blame on the medical and treatment community here too. They started changing the language because they were so concerned about stigma that illegal and dangerous drug use started to become substance abuse.
Substance use disorder.
And now it's substance use. We have detoxified every part of this to make it almost normal. Well, it's not normal, and it's killing people. And, we talk about the deaths, and that is obviously the worst of it. But death isn't the only bad thing about this. I mean, any family that has gone through this is a family that's going through hell, and we obviously sympathize with them, but we can do something about it. So we decided to roll up our sleeves and do something about it.
It's when we set out to kind of do this, right? Like, I know there are prevention organizations across the country, but they tend to be geographic and regional, and they tend to be, from what I gather, and I did a lot of research before, we started this off. It certainly seems that there's this old model of, we do a presentation, we bring in somebody to a high school, we tell them about the education and the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse. I'm for things that work, and this is kind of where I got it with the harm reduction. If harm reduction was working, sign me up for that, right? It's not working. We have record high drug use in this country. What we're doing is not working. That's why I was so intrigued about the approach that we were taking here with the Hard Stop campaign, is doing things differently to meet kids where they're at, right? Using social media as the medium to try and connect with them and the messaging. I mean, to me, that just seems like a no-brainer. And I was really surprised when we see people not doing this, or some of the ways that they're speaking to kids who seem to be much more sophisticated these days, from the games that they play to the music and the TV shows that they're exposed to. How will we know if kind of what we're doing with the Hard Stop campaign is working? Are we going to be surveying? Are we going to be looking at the national statistics that are out there? Like, how will we know, and how will we tell our audience that, hey, what we're doing is really effective?
Yeah, and that's always been the challenge in prevention, is measuring what you're not seeing, measuring what isn't there,
Right.
measuring what's not happening. But we do have pretty good data on use now, regular use. The National Household Survey is probably the gold standard. There are other ones that are pretty good. Various states have pretty good measurements. I mean, our goal that you and I have committed to is seeing a steady reduction once we launch in a bigger way than we have.
Yep.
Once we have market saturation, it's my prediction that we'll see those numbers going down, not only in this state but nationally. If we don't see those numbers going down, I'd be shocked.
Yeah,
not only in
Totally
death but
agree.
in regular use. You made an interesting point about the formats for a lot of the prevention activities that have taken place, whether it's in a school assembly or in a classroom. I don't know if you speak French, but if I wanted to speak French,
I do not.
all right. So if I were to teach you to speak French, about the worst thing I could do to teach you to speak French is giving you one class one day. You're not going to learn to speak French in one class. You're not going to learn to speak French in 3 months. What we need to do is saturate, and that's what we did in the 80s and 1990s. You couldn't turn on a TV without seeing one of those ads.
Points.
You couldn't hear a speech from a political elected official without hearing one of those ads, or for that matter, people wanting to get into elected office. They would talk about these issues. I've been watching old 80s shows. One of the most popular shows in the 1980s, interesting, Hill Street Blues. Almost every single episode, the drug dealer is the bad guy, and almost every single episode, drugs are the problem. Today, you have TV shows, both on HBO and Showtime, as well as in network, where you're almost rooting for the drug dealer, and some you actively are rooting
Right.
for the drug dealer. It's an entire conceptual shift that has taken place, and we wonder why we're at where we're at.
It's not that hard to figure
It's
out
not
when
that
you
hard to
step
figure
back.
out,
And I
no.
just think we got to bring it to light a little bit more, which I think is what we're doing. One of the other things that, when you and I just talk, not on air like this, is just how prevention works. And I'm not just saying prevention around, youth drug abuse. I'm talking forest fires,
Yep.
mothers against drunk driving,
Yeah.
cigarette smoke. So
Yeah.
when we get people that constantly kind of say, well, that doesn't work, and I'm just going, I think even, feel what you want about COVID, we got the word out as
Yeah.
a country that, hey, there's a vaccine or whatever it is. Again, I'm not trying to talk about the efficacy of any of that. I'm just talking about prevention messaging and 6-foot distance. Like, this country knows how to do that. Like, how can we do that again? And why aren't we doing that a little bit more?
When this country cares about a public health message, it knows how to give one. And you're right about COVID. Sorry to look at my phone. I
No,
just
go.
wrote down some statistics before I came in. When it comes to our youth, in 3 years of COVID, we lost about 1,700 children under the age of 18 nationally. 3 years, 1,700 deaths. We lose over 1,000 children every year to drug poisonings, which means nationally drug poisonings are killing about 75% more children than COVID ever did.
Wow.
Are we closing schools? Are we disrupting their lives? Are we masking them? Are we drug testing them? Are we requiring drug tests before they engage? No, we're not. And I'm not even suggesting any of that. I'm simply saying that when we are excited and energized by a public health campaign, we know how to do it. We did it with cigarette smoking. You're absolutely right. We reduced cigarette smoking by 50% in this country.
That's huge.
We did it with forest fires. You're absolutely right. We did it with drunk drive. We did it with littering. We did it with, what was his name? Wild Eyes Cody, the Indian who, with the with the crying campaign. People used to throw trash out there. We did it with seatbelts. We do it with all kinds of public safety issues. The idea that it can't work here is disproven by the fact that it did. The theoretical was proven by the actual, and we're going to prove it again.
Good. I like seeing you fired up like this too. It gets me fired up as this. I know that we're on to something. And again, 1 in 5 families is impacted by this. I think it's 20% actually struggle with drug or use addiction issues. Then the families that are impacted. So, I mean, there is not a family that I go out when I share my story or do this podcast or go on social media. It is constantly impacting others. And so many people, it just seems like want to throw up their hands and be like, what are you going to do? Something that just hit me as you're speaking, I mean, a public health emergency or crisis. Do we call it that at a national level? I don't know, because it feels like we should, or maybe we are. And that, again, is another kind of just glossing over people, but that feels like what it is. Why are we not treating it more that way?
Well, it's amazing.
Why is this one different than the others?
It's amazing who we feel it's important to protect and who it isn't. Usually social policy is geared around protecting children. And in COVID, we talked a lot about the children with their athletic activities, their social activities, and shutting down schools. But this is affecting the children much more. How about young adults? Drug poisoning deaths are now the #1 killer of young adults. Last year, we lost about 80,000 Americans under the age of 50 to drug poisonings, okay? Last year. Now, over 3 years of COVID, 75,000. We're losing more adults every year than in all 3 years of COVID. We have misprioritized what should be a public health emergency and what shouldn't be a public health emergency. We have misprioritized not only in a way that is misdirected, but in a way with people who don't have comorbidities. Yeah. This is the only thing that's going. We haven't even talked about suicide. We haven't talked about fatal car accidents.
Right.
We just finished commemorating 9/11. We are losing about a 9/11 a week when you add car accidents, deaths, and fatalities due to drug poisonings to the overdose rate. A 9/11 a week. We are losing every single day in America 2 commercial airliners crashing into each other over the skies every single day. You tell me what's an emergency and what isn't.
How is that not leading the news every day? How are we not up in arms? How are we not taking more action? And I'm not just saying throwing more money at the problem. We need a plan like what we're doing.
I think what we're doing is it.
To do this, because I feel strongly, again, as we've talked off the air, it's like we can keep building treatment centers. We can keep building outpatient programs. We can keep building more beds and more places to put sick people, but we're just going to keep filling them up. So we have to get in front of this thing, not to the scene of the crime with the ambulance, right?
Let me give parents some good news and some hope, because there's a piece of beautiful research. You know this well. There's a piece of beautiful research that comes from the work of Joseph Califano from Columbia University and from Robert DuPont of the Institute of Behavioral Health, who was the nation's first director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. If you can get a child to the age of 21 without initiating dangerous and illegal drug use, the chances they'll ever start are practically zero. Getting them to 21 safely can be done. People do it. We're going to try to do it. That is the point of our social messaging. They don't know the dangers. 40% of Arizona high schoolers don't know what the word fentanyl is. That came out of the most recent youth survey of Arizona. That's shocking to me, because you and I operate in the world where we hear fentanyl 10 times a day. So we have to saturate with social media messaging, and that is what we're going to do. That is what's been missing. And I think the problem is so dire and the absence so great that even our effort will make a dramatic difference. You want to put out the website again?
No, that's good. Of course. Boy, go to the stopstartshere.org. Seth, thank you for bringing the heat today. I mean, it's just so needed. One of the things I struggle with is too, I mean, yes, our messaging is geared towards youth, but we also talk to the parents with certain part of our marketing as well too. One of the things that I see so often, and I think may contribute to a lot of this, or at least the latency in terms of kind of addressing it with their own child in the house, is this denial.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a mom or dad. I smoked weed where I was a kid. I don't, maybe they even want to smoke weed with their kid or allow them to. How do we get through to the parents that to kind of make them act a little bit sooner? It feels like there's a denial of like, no, they're okay. No, they just got a new peer group. Oh, they're just staying out a little bit later, doing what kids do. Like, I need to be able to connect with them in a way that they're taking action a little bit sooner. Because with the survey, one of the research that pieces that I often cite is by the time a parent finds out that their kid is using drugs, it's typically 12 to 18 months later. That is a more than enough time to develop a full-blown addiction, if not a serious problem use. So how do we get in some of this to the parents and get them to take action as well too?
Well, you have to, as the novelist Percy Walker said, you have to push back against the age as push as hard against the age as pushes against you. We have to be as strong and as loud as that culture that you're talking about. The marijuana thing's a highly interesting issue. Didn't mean the pun there. When people talk about in their 40s, 50s, or 60s marijuana, most of them who aren't expert in this field, and you can't expect everyone to be an expert in this field, they think of the marijuana they knew in high school or college. It's a totally different drug now, doing totally different things to the mind, doing totally different things to the brain. More children went to emergency departments during COVID for marijuana overdose than for COVID.
I didn't know that.
And I want people to Google or whatever their web search function that they favor is, DuckDuckGo, you name it. I want them to Google marijuana, and I want them to Google marijuana in emergency department visits, and they will be shocked. They will be slack-jawed. Look, we talk about a lot of problems in this country, whether it's school violence or school shootings, whether it's violent crime, whether it's education deficits or education dropouts, whether it's the chronic homeless problem. You will find drug use at the base of every single one of these things. You want to get to the base root. You want to get to the foundations. You want to get to solving any of these major issues. You've got to solve this problem. Ask a district attorney or a county attorney what percentage of violent criminals they arrest are hopped up or regular drug users. They'll tell you regularly between 80 and 85%. You deal with the chronic homeless issue that one of our co-founders and friends, Jeff Taylor, is involved in, or anyone who's involved in the chronic homeless problem, you will find that 90% of those people who are chronically homeless are regular drug abusers or users. You talk about the dropout problem, you talk about the education deficit problem, you will find drugs. You talk to the directors of children safety, you talk about to the directors of children services and child removals, you will find drugs at about 80 to 85% at root of each of one of those. You want to get to the crime, you want to get to the youth problems, you want to get to the family problems, you got to get to this problem. So it's a holistic view that we have to have about really what is the root cause of so many of our problems. This is a big one.
Boy, that was really good. I'm just sitting here. I'm trying to stay engaged while I'm listening to you, just going, man, he is so spot on. What is it not touching? What is it not impacting? And not just in our own families, but you're right, around the city, around homelessness, around crime, around education. I mean, it just touches everything. And then I have to believe that some of the medical costs associated with this thing contribute to some of these skyrocketing healthcare costs as well.
This costs our country hundreds of billions of dollars a year. It costs our workplaces hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And we're not even talking about the law enforcement costs. We're talking about medical care. We're talking about the uninsured. We're talking about treatment. We're talking about all kinds of ongoing recovery and counseling and workplace accidents, not to mention fatal car accidents. About half of our fatal car accidents in this country, of which there are about 50,000 a year, have drugs involved in them. You really want to be serious about serious social policy problems, you got to be serious about this one.
It's so well said. And we get comments, I am on our social, at Hard Stop Official, and watching the comments come through. And we see a couple things that regularly pop up. It's like they call us prohibitionists, against marijuana and mushrooms, or like this whole natural, call it hippie, whatever kind of contingent that wants to kind of just push this thing. The second group is kind of the group that just says, what are you going to do? It's not going to work. This isn't going to work. You're just regurgitating some of these types of things that have always been out there.
What are they going to do?
That's exactly the pushback that I get out there. And I am, one of the things that I've been saying about our organization, what we do is unapologetic, right? Like, somebody needs to get out there and push the message of prevention, that there is no such thing as safe drug use. It's out there. there is a whole campaign that's like F fentanyl too, that is doing some great work as well too. They were just talking about marijuana laced fentanyl as well too, and how this girl is forever 16 now because she was at a party and smoked that joint that was laced with fentanyl and is now forever 16.
You know, Steve, I hope you and I aren't doing this podcast or having this discussion 5 years from now, because I hope we had made a huge dent in it so that we don't have to. But if we do, we won't be talking about fentanyl. We'll be talking about something you mentioned last week, xylazine, also known as tranq. You know, it's not just ever one drug. You know, every kind of half decade seems to have an experience with a big drug problem. At one point it was heroin, at one point it was cocaine, and then it became crack cocaine, and then it became meth. And now we're actually back to meth again, as we have now a fentanyl problem. But there's this new thing I only heard about 8 months ago, starting out in Delaware and Pennsylvania, when my old buddy Doug Murray, sorry, not Doug Murray, my old buddy Jeff Murray was talking to me about, watch out for this thing that's coming out of Philadelphia. You're going to hear more about it. It's known as the zombie drug, and it turns people into zombies as it eats into their skin. They literally can't get up off the ground, and son of a gun, it's already here on the West Coast in 6 months. So it's not going to ever just be one drug. It's all these things. We want kids not to start. If they never start, look, make fun of abstinence all you want. And you can ask me, how does it work? Every single time it's tried. Every single time it's tried. That's how it works.
It's not rocket science. It's effort, consistency, repetition. I love what you said of just not being able to turn on the radio, the TV, and just have that message reinforced, which is why we're really out here encouraging folks to follow us at Hard Stop Official, especially your sons or daughters, but also your moms and dads as well, too. You know, instead of that 1 hour assembly once every year, we want to get 30 seconds to a minute of your son or daughter's time once, twice a week to continue to reinforce that messaging. And by the way, we're not just saying just say no. We've got some really compelling content that is kind of meeting folks where they're at and sharing personal stories from peers that are their age.
And we got a great playbook for parents too. Parents are looking around for, what do I do? How do I do this? We have distilled, you and I primarily have distilled, mostly you, have distilled a nice parents playbook, 7 easy steps you can follow on how to raise a drug-free kid.
It's straightforward. And you know, again, I scratch my head and go, you know, not everything that we're doing is rocket science. It just needs people to lead the charge who are unwavering in a commitment and a messaging out to the folks that, hey, this is important. This is going to impact your family. We need to do something, and we need to do something now. You know, as we kind of get towards the end of this, any other thoughts just around prevention, the organization, mission? What do you see as the future of drug prevention? You know, kind of what's on the horizon?
Well, most of my work when I lived in Washington, D.C. was on education and on drugs. And the thing I learned mostly from education is, if you want to have a successful education policy in any community, local, national, you name it, you want to replicate what works. You see what works, you find it, and then you replicate it, and you replicate it like the old shampoo commercial. And I believe we're going to be really the first and the loudest voice here, but we have a big mission in front of us. We're trying to steer a ship of culture. We're trying to turn against as we push back against a culture, and it is going to work. I guarantee you we are going to save lives, and we are going to educate people. I want more and more people to see it, and if they join us, wonderful. If they replicate us and copycat us, so much the better. We don't have a copyright on this, but I do want them to join us and give this a shot, because everything else has failed. Everything else in the war that we have been fighting for, the campaign for our children's health and our young adults' lives, has failed. And raising the white flag of surrender only leads to more deaths. We have that image in our heads that I gave you of 2 airplanes crashing over our skies every single day. 8 years ago, it was 1. Are we going to have 3 next year? Are we going to have 4 next year? Or are we going to step up and do something about it? Last thing I'd say, and this has been a big issue of mine for many years when I work in youth policy, we wouldn't have young adult problems, we wouldn't have youth problems if we didn't have adult problems. So we're aiming to educate the adults as much as we are the children of this country. And together with our great team, I want to put in a word for Hugh Hallman. I want to put in a word for Jeff Taylor. I want to put in a word for Ambient Skies and Ashley Reagan. And God bless you, Steve, because it's great partnering with you on this.
It's a pleasure, man. I tell you, I get excited. I feel like this. I'm in a locker room before a football game or something. I'm pumped up.
Let's go, man.
Go change the world right now.
Hike.
Well, look, this is really happening. Again, if you can please get out there and support us, go to the stopstartshere.org. Find us at Hard Stop Official. We're doing this. This is happening now. Anytime you can like, share, comment, send our video to a friend. It's the little stuff that costs you nothing that really makes a big impact in kind of helping get our message out to the world. Stay tuned. Lots more coming from us. Seth, you're a friend, you're a colleague. I look up to you. Thank you so much for spending time on my podcast today. You know, really, it's been a pleasure to interview you and love what we're talking about here. So that's all we got today. My name is Steve Moak. This is the Unlicensed Counselor. Until next time, thank you very much.